What's up, guys? Jake here, back with another review of something that I don't think Tyler will review or care about. So anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk about Peacock's Twisted Metal. So I've had very little experience with Twisted Metal. I played it here and there as a kid. I remember when Twisted Metal Black came out, that was a big deal. I think Twisted Metal was a little bit more appealing to my brother and other people in my family. I was a little too young when Twisted Metal 1 came out, because that came out in 95, so I would have been 2 years old. And then the second one came out in 96. So the first experience I ever had with Twisted Metal was Twisted Metal Black, which, if you've watched this show, that is not necessarily the tone they're going for with the TV show versus the video games. I did play Twisted Metal Head-On the PS2 when they had the extra twisted version. I played that and enjoyed that. So again, very small experience with the franchise. So I had really low to no expectations for the Peacock show. I saw when it was announced. I thought it was interesting that they chose to do this property. I know that Sony especially has been really more open about doing video game adaptations. They had the Uncharted movie. The Gran Turismo movie is coming, or Turismo, is it Turismo? Gran Turismo. That's coming out later this month. There's a lot of different adaptations they've been doing. The Last of Us on HBO. So I was very interested to see how they would do Twisted Metal. I'm here to tell you I enjoyed this show way more than I expected. I, in fact, binge-watched it last Friday. I just hadn't had a chance to record this and put this up. But yeah, I watched it all in a day. It's 10 episodes. They're all about half hour each, so it's pretty easy to binge. And it moves quick. I think every episode moves rather fast. And yeah, overall, I enjoyed it. I want to kind of get some of my criticisms up front and some of the negative things before I really gush about all the things that I did enjoy. My issue with it, as I think is most people's issue with it, I think it does a great job of building lore and building stories and building these characters up, where there hasn't been a ton of that in the Twisted Metal series. With that comes a lot of time out of cars. And it does the Mortal Kombat 2021 approach, where they're saving the thing that you know about in the video game, the thing that everybody does, they're saving that for the next season. They set that up at the end of this first season. So there isn't a Twisted Metal tournament in this, and it's more all about character stuff, which is fine, but there aren't enough times of car combat. There's not enough times of these characters in the cars. And when they do have car combat, it's awesome. It works. It's fun. I just wish there was more of it. And I think that's probably one of my biggest criticisms when you're adapting a car combat game into a TV show. Ideally, you would think there would be more than just a handful of scenes with car combat. That being said, there is, plenty of driving and plenty of time in cars. I just don't think there was enough of it. I also think some of the cons for this was the pre-promotion for this. I think a lot of people were turned off by the Sweet Tooth John Doe fight in the second episode. In context, it makes sense. In context, it's still kind of cringy, and some of the jokes don't land, but that's comedy. But I think that didn't do any favors, because people were like, where are the cars? What are we doing here? And I think had they had a little bit more car combat in the promos, maybe people would kind of gotten more on board. But also keep in mind, this show has done well. I know I don't really like Rotten Tomatoes that much in terms of a bar of success, or however you want to perceive it. In the 90s percentile for crowd enjoyment, fan enjoyment, audience. That's the word I was looking for. It's doing well on Twitter based on what I've seen, just looking at the hashtag and seeing all the positive reviews. And I think it does that. I just wish we had a little bit more car combat, and I kind of wish we had a little bit more of doing more towards the tournament, maybe having Calypso in it a little bit more. Calypso is only in it for one scene. It's more about Raven's whole setup with John Doe and all that. Again, I wish there was a little bit more of that. So let's get into the positives. I kind of already did it, but the things I really like, I think Anthony Mackie is really good in this. It's nice to see him doing something outside of a Marvel role, doing something outside of Falcon or Captain America, and it's fun to see him, again, be a comedic leading man. And again, it proves without a shadow of doubt that he can be the leading man. He does have the chops. So if you don't think he's Captain America, I don't know what to tell you. The dude is Captain America, and I think he's going to be a pretty solid one. Samoa Joe. Shout out to Samoa Joe playing the body of Sweet Tooth, Will Arnett being the voice of Sweet Tooth. I don't understand why they did that. I understand why they casted Joe, because he's a wrestler. He can do the stunts. He can be physical. But I just don't know why they decided to make Will Arnett the voice of Needles Kane, a.k.a. Sweet Tooth. But it is what it is. It might be because Will Arnett's the producer on it. So is Mackie. Gosh, I'm going to butcher her name. I want to look up her name because I don't want to mess it up, because I really liked her in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I really like her in this show, but I can't think of her name. So 1 second. I'm going to look this up. It's Stephanie Beatrice. I apologize if I'm getting that name wrong, but she plays Quiet in this. She's great. Overall, I think the cast really works well. Shout out to Thomas Hayden Church being Agent Stone. I love his character and that arc that they go on. All of it. So let's kind of break down a little bit. I know I'm kind of all over the place, but I kind of just, I don't know, want to share my thoughts on this show. Again, I didn't have any expectations. I really, like I said, very passive enjoyer of Twisted Metal. I was never a huge fan. I played it here and there. And even I was picking up on a lot of the Easter eggs and nods to the game, and I think it does a really good job of that. I think setting it in the post-apocalypse and doing a more like Fury Road, Last of Us approach to this, I think works really well for this show and makes a lot of sense because, in those first games, it's happening in the real world or the normal, not a post-apocalyptic scenario, and then it turns into that because of all the death and destruction from the Twisted Metal tournaments. So I kind of like the idea that they kind of changed it a little bit and put it in the post-apocalypse. I think for the most part, the humor works. I think it's a pretty funny show. I think it does help that it's violent, and I think the gore and the swearing and the humor, the really, really dark humor works. And you can tell that it was, being made and produced by the guys that did Deadpool and Zombieland, and again, works for this show because I like it when Twisted Metal has a lot of this violence and hardcore, like heavy metal and like car combat, but it also has a sense of humor and it doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think, in my opinion, and I mean, you could argue that The Last of Us is a property that works that doesn't take itself or does take itself too seriously. But I would argue, I feel like a lot of these video games adaptations would work better if they were allowed to just kind of be a little tongue-in-cheek and kind of play a little bit more humorous with their tones. And it works for this especially. I mean, for Pete's sake, you had the Harold lunch bag reference, which is such a deep-cut, silly reference to have in this. But, yeah, it's all great. I love the convoy where it's like literally a society that's living in the back of trucks and they're constantly moving. I love that. I think so much of this was done in a smart way. And I think a lot of the car combat, that was my big gripe. I think a lot of that was cut down because of budget. I think most of the money went to getting Anthony Mackie and Will Arnett to be a part of it. So I think that kind of caused a lot of the money to go there. But overall, I enjoyed it. I think the big shining thing for me was when we finally got to the car combat. Because like I said earlier, the car combat fucking rules in this show. It was fun. Like episode 9, there were a few times I had really good cliffhangers on these episodes. Episode 9 in particular, we have the situation where they're all in this parking lot. It's Agent Stone, it's the convoy, and then eventually freaking Twister, because we see that Twister's car is in this. We got Agent Stone, then we finally get Roadkill, and then all of this is going down, and then Sweet Tooth pops in and puts the fire on his head, so now he's got the flaming head like the video games, and it just like sets it up, and then he shoots some rockets and blows things up, and then boom, we're into the next episode. And then episode 10, it's like, finally looks like Twisted Metal, where all this carnage is happening, explosions. Shit, they even do the fucking special move, Sweet Tooth in the games, where he shoots all these rockets out of the head of the ice cream truck. Like, there's so much cool shit in those last 2 episodes, and it excites me because I think that's where they're headed in season 2. We're finally going to get that, but I can understand the criticism of like, okay, it took a long time to get there. Now, for me, I enjoyed the character stuff before we get to the blowing the load of the car combat. I did enjoy the character stuff. I love the backstory of John Doe and his story with Evelyn. Like, shit, I even love that they made Preacher the way they did Preacher in this show. Like, there's so much I did enjoy. And that scene when John Doe loses Evelyn, I was like, oh, I felt bad for him. It was really bad. It was like losing a friend for him. And seeing that story develop, seeing how Agent Stone is this like badass authoritarian figure in the post-apocalypse, but then you find out he was kind of like a little bitch before the post-apocalypse. Then you see why Quiet didn't talk for a good portion of the first episode, or I didn't think she even talked in the first episode, and then hardly any, or begin like the first half, 3/4 of the second episode. You understand that she was in a town where she was pretty much owned by other people, kind of like a slave situation. Like, there's so much cool character. I mean, shit, even Sweet Tooth gets an interesting backstory. Insane backstory, but an interesting backstory nonetheless. I think this show was done with a lot of care. I think it was done with a lot in mind of like, we are clearly going to go in a different direction. We're going to do our version of it. But they still had the Easter eggs. They still had the callbacks and the fun things and fan service for people that enjoy Twisted Metal. And I think it does a good enough job to bring in people that never really played the games and enjoy it all the same. And that's kind of what the whole point is for this show. So have you seen Twisted Metal Season 1 on Peacock? Which, by the way, I understand we got strikes going on. We got to figure that shit out first. But I really hope this does well on Peacock. I hope enough people are talking about it on Twitter and seeing it enough, because I'm not calling it X, it's Twitter. I really hope that we get a Season 2, because I'm all in on a Season 2. I want to see the Twisted Metal tournament in live action. I want to see what they're setting up. I'm really excited about it. We got Axel references. We got Mr. Grimm references. We got the is it Shadow, I think? Well, Dollface. We had like all this shit is set up for a really cool Season 2. I hope we get it. I hope Peacock can get it done. Now, I understand we got strikes to worry about, but hopefully it did well enough to get a Season 2. So what did you think of Season 1 of Twisted Metal? Have you seen it? Comment below. Let me know. Did you like it? Did you love it? I don't know. Like, comment, subscribe. Click that bell so you get more notifications when we do things like this. Keep on trucking. Is there a catchphrase for Twisted Metal? Get twisted. I don't know.
Off panel, off topic with Jake and Tyler.